Introduce myself. My name is Kelly Campbell, and I am the Associate Director of the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations at CSUSB. Our institute serves children, parents, and families in the inland region through research, education, and applied services. And today it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Stacy Morris. Dr. Morris is an assistant professor in the Child Development Department at CSUSB. She focuses on adolescent development, and her research is on supporting adolescents who contribute to their communities, civic engagement, and how young people understand and work to combat inequities in society. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Morris.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm very excited to share my work with you all. And the work that I'm going to be presenting today is kind of a combination of my collaborations with people and the things that I've learned from people, the things that I've learned with working with young people. So I'm so excited to share this work with you, and then also hear your thoughts on what you've seen in working with young people, your thoughts on what you think works, so that I can, incorporate that into my head of how to support youth. So I'm going to be talking about today, a really grand goal, how to make the world a better place. And hopefully I'll accomplish some pieces of this to help you all think about how to support youth in trying to do that work and really centering their work in this way. So what I'm focusing on specifically are actions that young people are taking to make their community or society more broadly a better place. And then the intentions to make society or their communities a better place. And this can be called civic engagement. Civic engagement is a really big umbrella term to think of a lot of different things that we're probably really familiar with already, things that we do as adults and things that young people do in our lives, and working with young people as well. So we can see civic engagement as things that people do, donating money, giving money towards causes or organizations that they care about. It can be giving time, donating time, spending time volunteering, doing community service work with organizations, again, that you care about or in capacities that you care about. Or it can be contributing to society in other ways, maybe less formal ways, so planting trees to help the environment. We can also think of ways in which we are engaged or young people are engaged in the forms that we think of for civics. So engaged in more formal organizations, so voting or sharing your voice, which some young people aren't able to do. And so that's something to consider. We can think about running for public office, and that can be on a local level, it can be on a state or national level eventually, or it can be for organizations, formal organizations that you care about, running for leadership positions. And then we can work kind of outside of the system to try to address the system. So doing social activism work, protest, sharing your voice and your values through that form of engagement. So really, civic engagement is this huge term to talk about all of these different ways that we're just trying to make the world a better place. We know that when people engage in these types of involvement, that it's good, that it's a good thing, that it benefits the community. When you have people actively trying to make the community that they're living in or interacting in, when they're trying to make that place a better place, that improves the community. And so that's a good thing for the community. It gives resources to the community. It strengthens things within the community. And that makes that environment or that community a better place and a more hospitable place, a friendlier place for the people existing within that community. So it not only improves that community, it improves the people interacting within it. And just generally, it's a good thing for the world. societally, we all respect and value people giving back to their communities, people trying to do good. And so when we have people who are invested in the well-being of their communities and invested in the well-being of society and trying to take action to do things about it, that's a good thing for the world. And especially when we're getting young people involved who ideally will be trying to do good things, into adulthood, well into adulthood. Civic engagement is also really good for the individual participating in that engagement. And we know for everyone, but especially for youth, being involved in the community and actually making positive change in the community is associated with a range of benefits for that individual. So first off, they get to exist in a community that they're actively working to improve. They get to have community with those people that they're working with. They have increased levels of feeling hopeful about every day, but also about their future. They feel more hopeful about their future. And they tend to report greater feelings of meaning in life. They feel like they have more life purpose. This is also even related to things like mental health. So young people who are contributing to their environment tend to report lower levels of anxiety and lower levels of depression, symptoms of depression. Okay. With all of these benefits in mind, we want to support civic engagement. It's a good thing. But we also know that society has many inequities in their systems, in the systems. And so there are inequities in policies that impact things like housing, fair housing and access to housing, access to fair and equitable education, access to employment. Economic systems are inequitable. So people are unjustly, impacted by different policies. And so to be able to really make the world a better place, to be able to really improve your community, we need to pay attention to these systems because these systems are making it so that not everyone is getting a better community, so that the world isn't becoming a better place for all people. So the goal here and in my work is to try to think about how to put a wrench in these systems, how to dismantle these systems and actively work toward getting rid of them in different ways, addressing policies, addressing these policies that impact these systems to be able to make meaningful change that has these broader impacts, that has these impacts on creating equity, creating a more fair and just society. A way that we can start to do this, so one piece of this puzzle in trying to combat these inequities is just recognizing that inequities in society exist. And so critical reflection is one piece of this, understanding that society is not equal and that policies and systems and institutions are all involved in playing a role in that. And so you can't just be nice to someone. You can't just, interpersonally change the lives of people or help people in the day-to-day and really dismantle these systems because they're still going to be impacted even if you're just being nice to them or, donating your time. We need to really address these systems to be able to create a better community for all people. And so then the other piece of that is doing something about it. So you recognize that inequities exist. So what are you doing to dismantle those inequities? Individually, but also in community, in collaboration with others. These are really lofty goals. These are big things to do. And this is going to take time and it's going to take consistent and kind of communal effort to be able to address these inequities. And oftentimes when we're thinking about big goals in society, big changes like this, we think about adults being the people who have the power to be able to make changes. But we also know that young people have a role in making their society a better place. Young people, so teenagers and young adults, have a role and can play a role in addressing these systems of inequity. And we can see different forms of participation that start to get at that. So we can see young people being involved in just sharing their voice, sharing their values, talking about what they think is important and talking about these systems of inequity that they think are important to address. We can also see them getting involved. So even if they don't have the ability to vote in formal systems in their country, in their government, they can still be involved in petitions. They can still help gain speed for different policy changes. They can organize other young people. They can be involved in organizing with others in their communities still. And there are tons and tons of examples, especially in this recent generation, of young people being involved. But this is something that's been happening for decades and decades. Young people have not been silent on the issues that matter to them. And really, young people tend to be at the forefront of big social changes in social protest and activism, in moving our society forward toward having more just values. So you would think that recognizing that inequity exists would kind of automatically lead to trying to do something about it. You would think that knowing that inequity, that society is unequal, would make people want to get up and go, would make people want to go try to address these systems or make changes. But in my work with my collaborator, Sarah Suzuki, we have seen that this is not actually the case, that just recognizing that inequity exists in society doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be doing anything to try to dismantle it. And this can be for a lot of different reasons, but we are trying to kind of figure out what pieces can support this. So when you know that society is unequal and you care about that, you think it's a bad thing, what's going to help you make those movements and get space, get community, and get going to try to dismantle inequities? So one piece that we've seen as something that could be important for this is having a sense of social responsibility. And that's the idea that it's the individual's responsibility and the community's responsibility to make changes in our society. So not just that you have a responsibility as an individual in your community, but specifically that young people for this age range that I'm talking about have a responsibility to be making changes, that I as a person think it's important that young people be involved. Having a sense of social responsibility can be helpful in working toward promoting this critical action or this critical civic engagement. But that alone doesn't help. So that with critical reflection doesn't do it all. We also know that having a sense of self-efficacy can be really important. So feeling like you can accomplish your general goals in a day, feeling like you have efficacy, like you have the power and the tools to be able to do the things that you set up as goals for yourself. And then also having civic efficacy. So with these different strengths or assets or kind of support systems in place, you can see that people tend to be contributing more in this way. And civic efficacy is a tough thing because this means that so people with civic efficacy think that they can actually make a difference in their community, in their government. And that's a bigger thing than just thinking that you can accomplish goals. And we have to think about, when we're thinking about how to promote civic efficacy in young people, we have to think about all of the barriers that exist to them actually feeling like they can make a difference. So first off, there are limited opportunities for young people to get involved in these bigger policy changes that we'd like to see, or in these bigger issues that do work toward combating inequities. So there are limited opportunities for them to get involved. And then when they do get involved, oftentimes there are limited opportunities for them to feel like they're actually making a meaningful difference. A lot of times when young people are involved in organizations aimed at combating inequities, or other organizations even, the work that they get assigned tends to be kind of less exciting, less invigorating for them, and maybe feels less impactful to them. And so it's important to think about the opportunities that exist and the ways in which young people are able to be involved within those opportunities. Another issue or another barrier is ageism. And so this is kind of, you might have heard yourself, or you might have heard people say to young people, you're too young to care about that, you're too young to do that. oh yeah, that's great to care about that, but think about that when you're older. Or even accepting or praising the work that young people are doing, but then when it comes time to make the real changes and do the real things, young people are not at the table. So ageism is another barrier to young people getting meaningfully involved. And then young people have all sorts of competing pressures that we have to consider. Competing pressures to do well in school, to get a good job, to get a career, to figure out their lives. So there's a lot of things happening in terms of trying to get toward the next step in their development that makes making space for these things and being really meaningful and meaningfully involved already more difficult. So the kind of end goal is that we support young people in this work, because if we support young people in making critical engagement, being critically involved in their communities, they're much more likely in the future as adults to continue to be involved. If they have opportunities now to be involved in a way where they feel like they're making a real difference, that promotes involvement in a lifelong trajectory, which is really important for creating a society that we want to see. So we can support young people on different levels. We can support internal assets or strengths. And we can think about their external supports as well, and what ways we can promote and provide more resources externally. So for some examples, we've already talked about some of these internal assets. You can help people understand that, young people understand that inequities exist in society. You can help them interrogate those inequities. You can help them understand that these inequities matter. And you can talk through these things with them. You can also support a sense of social responsibility. So the idea that individuals are members of a community, and each member of a community has a responsibility to make a difference and to try to make things better. You can also promote efficacy. So self-efficacy is something that we can definitely get at in school systems, in families. And so promoting young people's making goals and meeting of their goals can be really helpful. And then helping them understand or supporting ways in which that they can actually feel efficacy on a civic level, that they feel like their voice is heard and matters, and that they can make meaningful changes. We can also think about motivation as an asset or a strength that will get young people going and caring about making differences in their community. And then we can also consider external supports. And so those are, you all probably, so adult mentors in the lives of young people. We can think about the ways in which mentors can promote these internal assets, but also create space and create supportive environments to be meaningfully engaged. We can promote a sense of community, because especially with action that is aimed toward dismantling inequities, this is hard work and it can be draining, and especially for youth who are really directly impacted by the issues that they're trying to dismantle. So if we're thinking about youth of color or queer youth, this can be especially draining on them. And so promoting a sense of community can be a protective factor and a motivating factor. We can also think about the ways in which we find space for young people to be involved, and trying to make sure that that involvement can be meaningful and feel like it's making real changes, and like there are opportunities to do the things that they want to do. And then just logistical resources for getting involved, connecting young people, helping them, directing them to resources that exist, providing resources that are necessary to actually get involved, whether that's transportation or funding or people to sign papers, things like that. So I want to talk about a couple different layers of ways in which we can support young people in not just recognizing inequity, but then taking action to dismantle those inequities. So on one level, it's helpful to facilitate youth leadership and allow them to have ownership, give them space for ownership over their involvement. We can do this by, one, asking young people what they want from their adult mentorship. So, what is it that they're hoping to have in terms of support? What dynamics do they want? How involved do they want that mentor to be? And what things do they need from that mentor? Instead of just assuming and taking on a role of, the adult driving the project, see what young people want. And oftentimes, when young people want to be more involved and they have the space to do so, they can create really great things with that support. Another thing to help promote efficacy, and this is helpful with anything, whether we're thinking about completing school assignments or trying to be involved in community level change, we can help young people break down the goals into smaller pieces. So big system level change is a really overwhelming goal, but thinking about the different individual pieces of that you can break down and breaking those things down into smaller tasks, scaffolding that breakdown can be really helpful for accomplishing meaningful things along the goal, along the way of meeting that ultimate goal. And then supporting with logistical needs so that young people can focus on that leadership and young people can focus on the things that they want to do. So signing papers as an advisor, providing transportation, connecting to these logistical things that get in the way of young people just being involved and being involved in their community. Another thing that you can do is show young people that there's a possibility to be able to make a real difference. And we can do that by sharing examples of other young people who have been involved in their communities and who have made real change in their communities. And this is especially helpful when you share stories of people who are local to the young people you're working with, who share identities with the young people that you're working with, who look like them. And so showing examples can be really important for motivating motivating people individually, and then also showing them that change is possible even when you're young, even when any certain number of contexts exist or circumstances exist. Another important thing is allowing for mistakes. So allowing for people to mess up and to learn and come back from that. And that can be, in doing hard work like this, people are going to make mistakes. And so teaching young people in terms of how to respond and how to kind of recover. And then in terms of mistakes, logistical mistakes or not accomplishing the goals that you want to accomplish, not getting whatever message it is out there that you want to get out there, learning how to kind of rebound from failures or things that don't go the way you planned can be really helpful for supporting that efficacy and seeing that, the journey toward equity is not always going to be a straight line up, that there's going to be some down points and some challenges to tackle. Another thing is in different spaces that you're working with young people, make space for them to have leadership, make space for them to support the leadership of other young people. And so just make space for that community in different environments, whether that's the classroom or working with them outside of the classroom. And so related to that, making space for meaningful involvement. This can be really helpful in and out of the classroom. So creating spaces, creating times where young people can share their values, their concerns, their passions. Having an open classroom climate is something that's really important. So a space where young people feel like their voices are heard and that they can work through some of these big issues is really helpful for actually motivating young people to get involved and for making them feel like they have the efficacy to be able to be involved. Also, scaffolding connections to real life issues, especially ones that you feel like matter to them, and asking them the issues that matter to them can be really helpful to that. So connecting them to spaces or ways of getting involved in your local community, connecting to them to things that can be really helpful for their professional development as well, because they need to be kind of balancing all of these other goals alongside their community values and the hopes that they have for improving their communities. And then in every space that you can, make sure that you are emphasizing young people's voices and values. and make sure that there is the space for young people to contribute and that they're not getting shut down when they try to contribute their voices. So this is in and out of the classroom. Okay. If and when you get the slides, so I've got a couple organizations that I wanted to share with you all. So organizations that are specifically dedicated to getting young people involved in activism and making changes in both a local and a broader context. And so there are links associated with each of these if you want to click on those. And that is my presentation. Thank you all so much for joining me, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Morris. So I do have several questions already submitted, and just a reminder for anybody who's wanting to submit a question, you can do so through the chat feature. It'll be sent directly to me and I'll get those out. So let's get started here with some of the ones that have already been submitted. So do you have any idea about today's youth and how they might compare to prior generations in terms of like, are today's youth more engaged compared to others, less, or was there a decade or an era where youth were considered the most engaged? If you can comment on any of that.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. So it's interesting because I think young people tend to get a bad reputation for being really uninvolved. I think especially millennials, my generation, and so really what we see. So for historic trends, there are times of less activity, less activism, and more activism. But typically, when we're thinking about protest and activity or activism, that's kind of on outside of the system change, so protest against things that people think are unjust, young people across decades tend to be more involved and kind of leading some of those things. There's fluctuation in terms of other types of involvement. So things like voting patterns has kind of shifted. And young people, I think, have always been slightly lower in their voting than older generations, in every generation though. And so we can think about a lot of things related to that. So access to information, access to actually getting registered to vote, things like that. But young people in Gen Z have been much more involved in some of those formal forms of engagement, like voting in midterms, voting in so in the US context, and then voting in presidential elections. But really, we've seen for decades and decades and decades, this is not a new thing for young people being involved, but surprisingly, they still kind of have this reputation for being uninterested and egocentric. So just caring about themselves.
I mean, it's funny. I guess some of it's tied to just being an adolescent or a young person as you're finding your own. But I find these youth so amazing because professors work with the young people and they're amazing right now. I think more than any other that I've seen in class. But okay, that's just my little tidbit there. Okay, so are there certain types of activism more beneficial to the individual than other types?
From what I know, I think the key piece is that activism is really personally meaningful to you, so that it's kind of feeding you and your passions and making you feel engaged and energized. I think that's one big piece. And also that it's going to have a direct impact on you and your communities is really helpful, of course, too. So I think activism that's personally meaningful has higher benefits in terms of some of those things, but then also engagement that's done in a communal system, where you have support, where you have people who can kind of take the lead on things when you're feeling depleted, who can support and share and kind of spread the effort. So activism that is supported by a community, by a sense of community, is really helpful.
With respect to the presentation you gave today, is there a specific age range for the youth that you were talking about?
Yeah, so the specific connections between reflection and action, that was with middle school and high school students. But I would imagine that it would apply to other age ranges as well. probably students right out of high school.
This is an interesting question. What do you do if your adolescent wants to get involved with a cause that doesn't align with your values? For example, do I let my daughter attend marches or rallies even though our perspectives are not aligned?
That's a really interesting question, and I can answer as a researcher, and I'm not a parent, and so I won't pretend to know what I would actually do. I can say what I would want to do. I think that's really challenging, and I do think about that as being a future parent, how challenging that would be. I think it's really important to create, like I had mentioned, a space where young people feel like they can talk. And so, um, you know, it's really complicated, right? So I think it's important for that young person, for their voices to be heard. It's important for their values to be recognized. And so I think creating space where y'all can talk is really important for that young person, for their efficacy, for their well-being, for their sense of worth, for all of these different things. And so I think it's complicated, when they're adolescents and you still have this responsibility to kind of be in a supervisor role and protecting their safety and keeping them safe. But hopefully opening up dialogue to be able to share why this is important to them, share why they want to be involved, share their feelings about why they need to be doing these things that might not align with your values. I think that's really important. And I'm saying that, and I recognize that, if I have a kid that has values that are different than me, I'm not sure what I would do. And I've thought about that. I've definitely thought about that. But I think the communication is the big piece. Because, I think values do shift. They tend to be somewhat stable to some degree, but values do shift over time. And so I think the important piece is knowing that they have someone to go to be able to talk out those values and their concerns and cares. I hope that kind of answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, we're needing to learn to coexist with people who don't share our values in the world. So it's a good place to start in the parent-child relationship if you can be respectful. But like you say, they're young still. So, okay, let's see here. So you've touched upon a little bit of this in your talk already. If there's anything more you want to share, how can educators encourage young people to engage in more activism?
That's a great question. So I think it's important to you provide examples. So I think I already mentioned that a little bit, but providing examples just so people can see themselves in the examples of people engaging in activism, and normalizing sharing your voice, normalizing that young people's voices are important. And then I think the big piece also is providing connections to resources or spaces for being involved, because I think a lot of times there's a challenge in knowing what is possible and what's out there. Another way of encouraging activism or encouraging young people getting involved in this way, I think, is by community building. And so creating space, maybe in a school context, where young people can get together and share their ideas. And it doesn't all have to be about issues of inequity. They can be centered on trying to combat issues of inequity, but still have social space, because that community building is really important for longevity and well-being through contributing to really hard issues.
This is one that I've been curious about as well. So the question is, are there certain types of events that are inappropriate for youth, such as political events? And my own interest is just aligned with, sometimes you see like on television that there are children at rallies and things, and they're children. So I guess there was kind of a second part of that question. At what age can a child make an informed decision about getting involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's important to remember that young people are going to have probably strong opinions about these things, no matter what. They're hearing about things in schools, they're hearing about things online. And so they're already forming their opinions, and they will have formed their opinions through their family socialization. So the conversations that they're having with their families already, they're forming their opinions through talking to friends. They're forming their opinions through reading and staying updated on what's happening in the world. And so they're all already going to be kind of forming strong opinions. They're able to form strong opinions and have an understanding of their identities and what matters to them, and what is really central to them pretty early on. And this starts to develop, I think, pretty early, but especially in adolescence when people are teenagers, and older teenagers. In terms of what's appropriate, I don't, I think that might be a family level decision and probably a family level conversation. I think safety always has to be kept in mind. And I can imagine being a parent and being really concerned for my child's safety would be huge. And so I think what could be helpful is talking through ways of engaging in ways that feel safe or feel physically safe for young people. In terms of an age limit, though, adolescents are going out typically and doing their own thing, whether you know about it or not. So I think talking about what might happen in certain situations. So what might happen if there's escalation? What might happen if there's violence around you? Because a lot of rallies do have violence. And not all of them, of course, but things can escalate when there are high tensions, or especially around really important central issues. And so I think problem solving about different scenarios can be really helpful, because I think, from my understanding, adolescents could find a way to go to things, whether you know about it or like it or not, as a parent or an educator. And so just problem solving tangible things and making action plans or safety plans can be really important. And then going with them if you have the space and you feel safe to do so and you're able to. I think that can be a great thing to try to promote safety. So I'm not going to say an age, but ways of navigating around that.
Your comments and actually even the next question remind me that a few months ago on the news, I saw some parents were rallying against tiny homes for the homeless in their community, and they didn't know that there was a counter protest from the high school students right across the street where they were protesting, and the high school students wanted the tiny homes, and it was the parents' children who were in the counter protest, and it was a news story. The parents didn't even know their kids. So it goes along with what you just said, but it even goes along here with our next question. So how can adults/parents help overcome their own preconceptions of how children and young people should participate in their communities? Sometimes adults are the problem and youth are quite aware of that. So I don't know if there's more you wanted to say on that.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that question is probably the first step. So, reflection and then action. I think it can be really hard to move from, you've gone for so long in a space of needing to protect children and needing to supervise on a much higher level for their safety. And so there's already typically conflict in terms of negotiating adolescents' independence and young people's independence. And so it's already kind of a hard time in terms of renegotiating boundaries and, what they should be doing and their full autonomy. And so I think one step is trying to reflect on times in which you feel like you haven't been doing that, or ways that you could improve. And then I think transparency is always great. And so, in this time period, young people are already recognizing that their parents and their family members and the adults in their lives are not perfect people. They might kind of think that you're a superhero, but they can also recognize that you have flaws. And so I think transparency in that process is really helpful. So just saying, hey, I'm trying to make sure that I listen to you. I'm trying to make sure that I'm valuing your voice and hearing you. But I'm having a hard time because of this or this or this. And trying to maybe bring them in as a team member and problem solve the ways that you can maybe do better to hear them, or ways that they can do better in that communication as well, because it is a partnership, that they're going to impact the way that you respond, you're going to impact the way they respond. And so being on the same page and being transparent about any struggles, I think, can be important.
Okay, well, thank you. That concludes our question and answer period. So with that, I would like to thank you, Dr. Morris, for joining us today and sharing this important information with us, and also to everyone for attending, of course. This webinar was hosted by the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations at California State University, San Bernardino. At the ICDFR, we've been providing guidance for parents and families based on science and best practice since 2002. If you would like to hear more from us, please like us, follow us on Facebook, visit our YouTube page where all of our webinars are available. And you can also learn more about our projects by visiting our website, www.csusb.edu/ICDFR. So again, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Morris. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and be well.
Thank you all so much.